Okay, I started recording now. For people watching this later, I just summarized some of the stuff we talked about last time. We'll not do it again, but I started recording now. We're at the beginning of today's lecture. Okay. So today we'll talk about our first world religion, Hinduism. Okay, you see this picture here, right? You have these multiple representations of gods within the pantheon of gods in Hinduism. So Hinduism is famously polytheistic, right? Polytheistic means many gods. We often say religions like that have a pantheon, right? They have many gods. Okay, it's a polytheistic religion. But we have to be careful about this because, Hinduism, as we'll see, does have an idea of some sort of supreme being. It's called Brahman. Okay. So there is, in a sense, this triangle of, here's Brahman on top, and here's all these different gods who are somehow representations of Brahman. And then here we are as human beings, and we're looking up. And yes, there's all these many gods, but there's also a supreme being at the very top of the pyramid. And we see this same pattern in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, even though those are always called monotheistic, right? One God. Well, you see the same kind of triangle because you see God at the top and you see humans at the bottom. And what do you see right in the middle? If you're a Christian, aren't there other supernatural beings that exist traditionally that are between God and human beings? What do we call them?
I don't know, but are you talking about the Holy Trinity?
Well, there's certainly that as
Or
well. That's a
angels?
whole other thing as well, because Hinduism has a trinity as well, right? So it's another complication. But I mean, there's
Angels?
multiple beings in Christianity, also in Islam and Judaism, that are supernatural. They're kind of like humans, but they are closer to God.
So angels.
Angels, exactly. And if you look at the Old Testament, many angels have their own particular kind of job, and they're very powerful, right? And they're somehow closer to God. They're not quite worshipped as gods necessarily, though they may have been at certain points in history. Right? We don't want to make assumptions about that, but I'm saying it has the same general structure, right? You have God at the top. If you're a Christian, it's God as a Trinity. And then you have all these multiple supernatural agents. Again, this idea of agency, right? Angels are beings with minds that are powerful, that it can act in the world, and they somehow straddle the line between the divine realm and the earthly realm, between heaven and earth, and they can travel back and forth. It's very similar to the way in which other polytheistic systems work. Right? It's just that we don't call angels gods, but it's still this idea, a supreme agent at the top, these other semi-divine beings in the middle, and then humans down here, right? So yes, Hinduism is polytheistic in a sense because there are multiple lowercase g gods, multiple supernatural beings with agency, but there is also a supreme being at the very top, Brahman, as we'll see. Now, as it turns out, the way in which our textbook treats Hinduism, it doesn't get all that much into the pantheon of gods, right? There are three main divisions of gods that we will look at, but then there's all these other avatars, and it gets very complicated. And we're just not going to get into all that, right? All the religions, all the polytheistic religions have so many gods, and they all have their own story, their own backstory. We don't need to learn about all of that. Right? We're going to learn about some of the main defining features of Hinduism that set it apart from some of the other religions. So we won't actually get all that far into what are all these gods, what are they up to, right? The focus won't be on that. Okay, any questions so far? Let's go into the slide. So I'm pretty much working off of the book here. That's pretty much what I'm doing. There's a little bit more in the chapter that I did not cover, okay? But I try to cover most of it. So make sure you are doing the reading as well. Right, so we're chapter 2. Pretty sure it's chapter 2. Yeah, I had you read 1, that says point of departure. And Hinduism starts on page 12. Make sure you're doing the reading, okay? Okay. So I have it sort of separated here between 4 different sections. So first, let's look at this idea of the path of desire versus the path of renunciation. The path of renunciation is the truly religious Hindu life, okay, where you get fully immersed in Hinduism. The path of desire, as it turns out, is not wrong according to Hinduism. Uh, but as we'll see, and as some of you may know, Hinduism often subscribes to the idea of reincarnation, right? So the idea is that you can live multiple lifetimes non-religiously, and that's just fine. It just over time your soul will get kind of tired of this constant cycle of birth and rebirth, constantly being trapped by desires, wanting to hang on to things, wanting to cling to desires, constantly being stuck in this basically a loop like Groundhog's Day, where you finally want to get out of it, and that's when you embrace Hinduism fully. Okay, so first let's look at the path of desire. The path of desire on Hinduism, at least according to this version of Hinduism. I have to always say that, right? I am working off of what Houston Smith's interpretation is of Hinduism. You might know a person or talk to somebody who practices Hinduism who will say some of this is wrong or they don't get it right. That's always going to happen. We have to focus on some interpretation of the religion, or else we can't talk about it at all because there's too many interpretations. So here we're looking at this interpretation, which says that, look, if you're not ready for a religious life, that's fine, right? You can just live a life of hedonism, as it's called, right? Hedonism is just the pursuit of pleasure, the pursuit of desire, right? And to a certain extent, does not define most of us most of the time. From the time we get up in the morning to the time we go to sleep at night, we want to feel good. We don't want to feel bad, right? So we pursue things that are pleasant to us, whether that's something like drinking some coffee with caffeine in it, cheers, right? Uh, Watching some shows on Netflix, whatever it may be. Right? We do this, many of us, most of the time. Now, we're all a mix of things, right? So most of us aren't pure hedonists, but, we do pursue pleasure. But most of us are what you might call enlightened hedonists, right? Because if you actually want to live a pleasant life, right, if you really want to embrace hedonism, you have to be kind of smart about it, right? If you really want to feel the best that you can for most of the time, you actually have to use some wisdom. And you can't fall back on this stereotype of the rock star who's partying all the time, right? Drinking and doing drugs and having sex with people all the time randomly. That is going to backfire eventually, right? Maybe you've seen enough specials about music and bands and stuff like that where you know that this happens. If you fully throw yourself into a life of pleasure, it's actually going to return to you in the form of pain, right? A good example of this is, of course, drinking alcohol, right? That can be great fun, but then the next day you have to deal with a hangover, right? And maybe for a while the drinking outweighs the hangover parts, but over time, you start to just sort of destroy your life a little bit if you're constantly drinking too much. So maybe you think drinking gives me pleasure, I'm a hedonist, so I should drink. But over time, you realize that that's kind of dumb, right? Because you're going to actually end up harming yourself more, and you're not going to live as pleasant of a life if you pursue uh, pleasant feelings, if you pursue desires without any kind of wisdom, without being smart about it. So if you're smart, you might have a couple of drinks here and there and have fun and then know when to say stop, and then the next day you can still get up and do what you need to do and do other fun things without worrying about the hangover. Then you're actually maximizing pleasure, right? Okay, so here it's pure hedonism versus enlightened hedonism. We're still here just in the path of desire. None of this means you're being religious, right? So oftentimes religions get sort of blamed for being puritanical or for saying that you shouldn't drink too much or have too much fun. But no, you don't have to be religious to know that, to just sort of be smart about how you pursue pleasure. There's often a price to be paid for something that's fun. Right? You can't just follow every impulse in the moment. There are some short term desires that have to be sacrificed for long term happiness. Right? You're all here doing this class right now. Now, for some people, this is so much fun to learn things and so on, right? But for many people, there's probably something you'd actually kind of rather be doing right now, right? You've got some time that you're sitting here watching this, listening. Uh, well, some part of you wants to be doing something else, right? But you're smart. You know that this is good for something greater in the long run. If you just follow your momentary impulse, then you don't get that long-term goal, right? So this is also part of enlightened hedonism. If you want to build a life that's pleasant and good for you, that satisfies you in some way, you got to be smart about it a little bit, right? But even if you're smart about it, you build a life where you don't go overboard with any of your indulgences. You don't overindulge. You do good. You keep everything balanced so that you can live a pleasant life. But even then, pleasure can seem like it's this fleeting thing, right? You're always pursuing this thing, and then you get it, but then you have it, and it goes away, and you're empty again. It's as though you are constantly empty and wanting to fill yourself with something. So even if you do that in a wise, smart way, in an enlightened way, over time that can start to feel dissatisfying, right? And on Hinduism, it's possible that you could live a whole life and not feel dissatisfied, right? Because again, we have reincarnation. So it's just that over time, it may start to feel that way. Now, realistically, I think even within a single lifetime, people might start to feel this way. If you're always just sort of trying to fill this hole in your soul, right, then that can start to feel a little bit empty. You start to feel meaningless. What am I doing? I'm just constantly trying to make myself feel good. What's up with that? Is that all there is to life? What you kind of want is some sort of lasting, deep seated joy that's within you already. Right? Easier said than done, right? A lot of the stuff that I talk about, I get it. It's not as though I am a perfect example of any of this, right? Yeah, you want some sort of deep-seated joy that's within you, that's different from, well, I need this and I need this and I need this and I need this that you're constantly pursuing. And then you get that, but then that feeling of emptiness comes back again and you're constantly pursuing pleasures, right? And that's the worry about the path of desire, especially the path of just physical desire, of just trying to satisfy your physical urges, even if you do it in a way that's pretty wise, right? Even so, you end up getting caught in this loop. So what do people do? People often think, well, a lot of self-help books and self-help gurus are all about this, right? Uh, they say you need to live a better life. Do you want to have wealth? Do you want to be influential or famous or powerful? Then you need to shape up, right? If everybody knows, if you've heard of that guy Jordan Peterson, right? He's like that, right? It's clean your room, right? You gotta shape up. You gotta sacrifice something. You got to not just pursue pleasure all the time, right? You got to be disciplined, and then you can make more money. Then you can have power and influence in the world. Then people will think you're cool, and then people will want to sleep with you. Things like that. So you might say that's a level up from just kind of pursuing momentary pleasures, even if you're doing it in a smart way. You might say, well, there's more to life than that. Yeah, I want to have lots of money. I want to be powerful. I want to be famous. I want to be recognized. Right? Worldly success, public recognition. That might be a step up from simple or even enlightened hedonism. Still a kind of pleasure though, right? It's still a kind of lack that you're feeling. You're kind of feeling like, I need more money, right? Now, many of us, of course, do need more money. I'm not talking about people who live in poverty here, right? I'm not trying to downplay that. But, there's this idea in our society that if you are really wealthy, you've sort of really made it, right? There's this coolness associated with a lot of wealth. So you might say that that kind of pleasure, it's a little bit higher than these simple physical pleasures. And yeah, it takes a little more self-sacrifice, it takes a little more discipline, right? You got to make something of yourself to get to that level, to become powerful or wealthy or influential or famous. Yeah, it's true. You got to do more than just organizing your life in such a way that you can enjoy simple pleasures without terrible consequences. No, you got to actually be disciplined and work hard and do stuff to get to that level. So that's, kind of higher, but it's still the path of desire. It's still that kind of life, right? But there is something good about it because at the very least, physical pleasure, if you just pursue that, that is purely ego driven, right? That's purely just for yourself. Whereas when you try to become powerful or famous or wealthy, it sort of requires you to be tuned to other people as well. Right? You have to turn your attention to other people. You have to get their attention. That's part of it, right? You have to make a splash in the world. So you're turning away from just being inward to being outward as well. You're including the society at large in your plans. And so that is kind of a good thing. You're enlarging your sense of yourself. You're still sort of in service of your ego, but at the very least, you are making something of yourself in a way that other people value. Right? You're not going to become wealthy, powerful, or famous or influential if you're not offering something that people value, right? That other people value. So there's something about this that's kind of maybe better than just pursuing the things that you value for yourself, right? Because now you're trying to make something of yourself to offer something of value to society. And again, that's what a lot of these self-help gurus these days try to teach you, right? They try to teach you to be disciplined and to try to figure out how to be influential, to talk to people and make a network and all that. Get up at 4:30 in the morning and take a cold shower, right? All the stuff that you need to do to get wealth, power, and fame. So you need to sacrifice yourself a little bit more, and you need to be attuned to other people. You need to offer something of value to other people, not just to yourself. So it's a good thing, for sure. It's not bad. But even that, even though you're doing this for other people as well, why are you doing it? There's something in you that is hungering for fame or fortune or something like that. You feel a lack within you that you're still trying to fill. So even though it's an improvement, maybe, right, over just pursuing simple pleasures, uh, it is still in service of your ego, your little self that wants things. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah. Yeah, for some people that's just the worst, right? I've actually done cold shower stuff, but I run warm and I do deep breathing to do it, I don't get up at 4:30 though. But yeah, I know that feeling. For many people that's just the last thing you would want is a cold shower, right? Yep. So, even though the pleasures of success, worldly success, right? They might be superior in some way over the desire for simple physical pleasure. If you're doing it just in service of your little self, your ego, we'll talk more about this ego, this self. We might call it the egoic self because there's a deeper sense of self that Hinduism will try to get you to tap into, right? But there's at least this sort of surface self, the story that you tell about yourself, right? Where did you come from? Where do you see yourself going? What are the things that you want out of life for yourself, right? That's this sort of a constructed self, this self that you've sort of made up, that's based on your life experiences, that's based on what temperament you were born with when you were born as a child, as a baby. Every baby has their own kind of temperament, and you combine that with all the life experiences you've had, and then you reflect on yourself and you sort of create a self, an ego. And it's that ego that wants certain things, and maybe it just wants those little pleasures, those simple physical desires, or maybe what it sees for itself is fame and recognition and things like that, wealth, right? But it's again this model of this little self that needs to be filled with something. It has a hole in it, and you're filling it with something, whether that's physical pleasure or worldly success. There's a certain insatiability that comes with this kind of pursuit of pleasure. One clue to that is that you might think that power, fame, and wealth are better than simple physical pleasure, but notice how those are like resources. Power, fame, and wealth are resources. Resources are limited, right? There's a certain amount of them, and you can't give them to other people without diminishing how much you have of it. Right? You sort of give it away if you try to give it away, and it depletes you, right? So it's again, you're filling yourself with these substances. If you give it away, you become emptier. You get rid of them in a sense. Right? Can you read that at the very bottom? Kind of it's glitchy there. Let's see if I can. I'll just raise it up. There we go. So the path of desire, whether it's simple bodily pleasure or worldly success, they can both become unsatisfying in the long run. Because what it's all about serving this small part of reality, right? This part of reality that you call yourself, your ego. And again, it's this sort of surface level ego, this constructed ego that could have been different, but it's this idea that you have about yourself that's sort of made up, right? That I am the kind of person that wants this, this, and this, and this. Right? So you're limiting what you want to this person, right? To this self, this part of reality that you call me. So it's about a very small part of a much, much larger reality. Okay. So in the long run, these can become dissatisfying. And in many cases, of course, that'll happen within a person's life. Some people will not feel this way. Hinduism says eventually you're going to feel this way, right? Maybe not in this lifetime, maybe not in the next, but after a while, your soul sort of, even though you might not remember your past lives, your soul will start to grow weary. It'll start to get tired of this constant cycle of serving the needs of this little ego that you create every time. You'll want something bigger, something deeper. That's where we get to the path of renunciation. And that's the truly religious path. So it makes sense for all people to first walk the path of desire. And notice that you could easily tie this into the idea of even animals being reincarnated, right, and perhaps going into higher forms of consciousness within the animal kingdom. Because notice animals, for the most part, are very driven by momentary bodily pleasures or needs or instinct, right? They're very much in the moment. There's an animal right there, right? They're very much in the moment, aren't they? They're not too worried about the meaning of life or dissatisfaction with life, right? Or feeling like everything's kind of meaningless. No, they can just be purely in the moment. Now, there's something to be said for that as well. Buddhism is going to make a lot of that, but we'll get to that later. The idea here is that perhaps even animals will sort of evolve over these cycles of birth and rebirth, and eventually become like a human, become slightly higher, and then the human will do this for a while. But over time, you start to feel this dissatisfaction, and then you'll want something different. You'll want to be liberated, right? You want to be liberated from this cycle of death, birth, rebirth, and so on. So renunciation here means that you're going to pursue something that goes beyond just what the ego craves for itself. It doesn't mean that you cannot pursue those things at all, right? It doesn't mean, for example, that you cannot pursue a path that where you become valuable to your community. That's a little bit like walking the path of worldly success, right? It doesn't mean that you can't do something in the world. You're going to end up doing something in the world, and sometimes you have to satisfy an urge. Sometimes you want to help people around you. That's going to be fine, but it's your mentality behind it. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this just to fill that hole in your ego, in yourself, in that limited sense of self, this little guy that you are right there, this person that you've constructed over time, that you have a narrative of or a story about, right? Aren't you sort of the main character in your own story? Don't you see yourself that way a little bit, right? You read a book, there's a main character, and there's something very specific about that character. You're like that too, right? You're the hero of your own story. So the first step on the path of renunciation is a little bit like that step of pursuing worldly success. It's just your mindset behind it is different, right? So it is true that to really start on the path of renunciation, you have to enlarge your circle of concern, as it's sometimes called. Your circle of concern should no longer just be what you want, what your ego wants. You should start to identify yourself with a larger reality. You should start to realize that you, the true you, uh, you are just one part of a larger reality, and you don't really need to separate yourself off so much. You do this when you think about yourself as a separate character, right? As a separate being. You are this specific person, and here's the whole world around you. Right? Well, that's sort of artificial, according to this view, right? In reality, you should realize that this person next to you is just as much part of this larger reality as you are. And so, in a sense, there's no disconnection between you and the other people around you. Right? So, you should enlarge your circle of what you care about to not just include yourself, but everyone in your community or in your whole society or the whole world for that matter. You become identified with more than just this constructed egoic self. You become identified with people everywhere. Now, it is true that within Hinduism, there's lots of traditions that have gotten criticized, and I can understand why. Okay, so it's difficult with religions, right? There might be certain parts that we can really uh, get something out of, something that's enlightening and edifying. But then there are certain ways in which religions take hold of society, and whole cultures are get shaped around certain ideas. So there many times Hinduism is criticized because it has these very regimented social roles. And in the West and America, especially, we don't like that, right? The whole idea is that freedom above all, right? Freedom for the individual. That's what America is all about. So you're born into the world. It doesn't matter what station in life you're born into. You can make something of yourself. You don't have to be that, right? Just because you're a woman doesn't mean you have to be a mother and a homemaker, right? You can do whatever you want. Just because you were born poor doesn't mean you have to stay poor. You can work hard and become rich, right? In Hindu traditions, there's a tendency to want to say, well, here's your role in community because this is your age, this is your station in life, right? This is part of it. Is it an essential part of the religion? I'm not sure, but historically that is kind of what happened. But we could take it with a grain of salt and just say, well, ask yourself, given where you are right now in life, what is the greatest value that you can bring to your community? I think that's the thinking behind this, that if you are, if you are a child, for example, your value in the community is going to be different than if you are an elder. Right? If you are a much older person who is wise and knows things about the world, your value that you bring to the table is going to be different. So I don't think we need to be too regimented here about, well, if this is your station in life, then this is what you must do. Rather, let's take it easy. Let's take it with a grain of salt and just say, the idea here is that you find what you can bring to the table. What do you have of value to the community around you, rather than just, what Netflix shows should I binge next, right? Now, that's of course still fine. You can still do those things, right? I'm just saying, like, a life of pure pleasure just for myself. We're trying to let go of that, right? And so here the idea is you ought to enlarge your sense of self to include not just your own needs, but the needs of your community. And so you'll start behaving in such a way that you can bring value to your community. Right? Thereby, you will enlarge your sense of self. So this is what is called the religion of duty. Right? Living your life in the appropriate kind of service to your particular social reality, right? So if you were to apply this to your life, you simply just think about where you are in life, what it is that you're doing, how much of it is just for you, how much of it is in service to the people around you as well. Right? And here the idea is find something that you can do that serves the people around you as well. Bring something of value to the table, not just for yourself, but for everybody around you. So everyone has a unique part to play. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses. It's all contextual, of course, right? If you are just struggling to get by, it might be very difficult to then also take time to serve others if you can barely keep your head above water, right? So make this all contextual, of course, right? But this is part of the path of renunciation. So try to enlarge your sense of self. It's not just yourself that you're serving; it's the larger community. Now, that sounds so good, right? It's like, yes, good, but even that right, is sort of fleeting and ephemeral, right? Like I said, it's contextual, right? Some people are not even in a position to be able to really serve their community because they are doing all they can do to keep themselves afloat.
I have
Also, yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
I have another odd thought. Okay, so
Yeah, I
this
love
this
Oddthought.
dog, this dog exists just to be cute. That is his function. Now,
Yeah,
laying at my feet is my guardian livestock dog, and she has a job. She guards the farm, she guards the chickens. She has a job. And if she wasn't doing her job, she would be a very unhappy dog.
I
And
see. Right. Interesting.
it's
Yeah.
just it just made me
Yeah.
see, well, this applies to them, but they're
For sure.
dogs.
Yeah. I know. I hadn't even really thought about that with dogs, but it's true, especially for certain. I mean, I don't know. Would your cute dog be unhappy if it didn't look cute anymore?
No, but his whole thing is like, I am loved and everybody
Yeah.
loves me. And so
Right.
he doesn't
That's
really
sort of
realize why he gets that, but that
right.
is what makes him
Right.
happy in the world is he's
Right.
pampered.
Right.
So
Yeah, it makes sense. So so we can definitely they can see it as sort of a metaphor or an analogy, right? For this idea that if you can find your unique function that serves other people, that is going to bring greater happiness than just serving yourself, right? Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I like that. But here the point is the caveat, right? That we can't just stop there because even this type of thing is in constant danger of being overturned, right? Like I said, you know, for some people it's hard or even impossible to find a particular role that they can play in the service of the greater community. or societies change, right? Your social reality can change. The whole society itself can disappear. A war can break out. All sorts of disruptions can happen that'll disrupt this more satisfying life than just pure pleasure. Right? This life where you've enlarged your sense of self and you're not just helping your community to feel good about yourself. No, you've enlarged your very sense of self, and that's good, but that can still get destroyed if this is where you get your sense of identity from, is from your larger community that you are currently embedded in. Well, that's kind of precarious, right? That can change. So even that. So it's a first step, right? The religion of duty. The religion of duty, this is necessary to adopt this sort of attitude. You must. But you cannot stop there, because it's still too limited, still too ephemeral, too fleeting, too fragile. The way that Houston Smith puts it is that what we really want, and I'll try to talk about this a little bit, what we really want are three things: being, knowledge, and joy. But most ways of life, especially everything we've talked about so far, and that describes most of us, or we're always somewhere along that spectrum, right? Somewhere on the path of desire, maybe pure bodily pleasure, or fame and wealth, or service of the community. We're somewhere in there, but if that's all we do, then we're still going to have these things that we want in limited supply: being, knowledge, and joy. There are certain limitations that we have in our everyday selves that are responsible for that. Okay? Our everyday selves are too limited. I've talked about this constructed ego, right? And we can enlarge it to a certain degree by throwing ourselves into service for the community, but then you're still dependent on that. To enlarge your sense of self. So we somehow need to dig deeper than that, right? We need liberation from these self-imposed limitations to dig to something deeper that is able to have access to being, knowledge, and joy without limitation. Let's see. Okay, so we'll talk about being, knowledge, and joy in the next part of the slideshow. But let's first break down being, knowledge, and joy. Okay, let's think about those for a second. Why are those the things that we want? Well, being is just existence. Right? For human beings, that's conscious existence, right? Uh, it's right there in our fear of death, right? It's our fear of mortality, is our fear of losing our particular kind of being. And notice, what kind of being do we have? We don't have the kind of being that this cup does, right? This cup is not conscious. It is not essentially a conscious being. Now, maybe on some traditions it is, but at least for the most part, we see a difference between a cup here. I can hit this cup as hard as I want, and I'm not worried about hurting it or hurting its feelings or anything like that, right? But the kind of being that human beings have is a conscious being. So why do we fear death? Well, we fear death because we're afraid of our consciousness stopping. We're afraid of losing our being. So what we want is our own continued existence. We want being. We want to exist. There are, of course, exceptions to that. When people are in extreme amounts of pain, sometimes they wish to be liberated from existence. But for the most part, it's an instinctual urge in people to fear death and to pursue life, right? That's what we mean here by desiring being. And it's not any kind of being, it's conscious being, right? It's conscious awareness. And that leads us to knowledge, right? Knowledge here just means that as human beings, we have this kind of relationship with the world around us that, again, Just mere objects do not, right? We are subjects. That means we have subjective awareness of the world around us, right? Just look at the world around you. You can see this world around you. This thing cannot, right? So knowledge just means we are the kind of beings that by instinct, we just perceive the world around us. We cannot help it. Right? We just sort of crave conscious experience of the world. It goes, all these three of these things go hand in hand, and they all describe different aspects of the same kind of phenomena, as it turns out. Right? So being here, since we are conscious beings, that's what we desire. We desire conscious awareness or knowledge of the world around us. That's the kind of being we crave. Right? That's the kind of existence that we are. And so that's what we want. We want knowledge. And knowledge doesn't necessarily here mean intellectual knowledge that 2 + 2 = 4, or that the earth revolves around the sun. It can just simply be, here you are observing the world around you. You are a knower, right? The cup over there is not a knower. My chair is not a knower. These books, they include all this knowledge, but they are not knowers, right? Human beings as conscious agents are knowers. This is part of our essence. So we desire that. We desire our being, we desire our essence. And of course, ultimately, what we want is some sort of satisfaction, some joy, some happiness, some form of that, right? We don't want to feel, at the very least, we don't want to feel like we're in some sort of mental hell, right? We don't want to feel grief and horror and horrible pain. We don't want that kind of being. It feels wrong somehow, right? Okay, so it kind of goes without saying, right? You can sort of think about why you do anything in life at all, right? There's some sense in which you are seeking a inner satisfaction, and we looked at all these different ways in which we try to do that. And whenever you try to fill the hole with things external to you, you get caught in this trap of reincarnation, right? So you can see where this is going, right? That the idea is going to be that you need to find deep within yourself all three of these things, right? That you need to find this joy already present within you by tapping into your deeper being, and by tapping into your capacity to know, but in a different sense than in your ordinary sense, right? That's where this is going to go. Okay, so what we really want. Don't try to read everything at once. Oh, there we go. Oh, I did break it down. Never mind. I thought I didn't have this here, but I do. We want being. We crave our own continued existence. And yes, this connection to the rest of reality. And I'm glad I have this up, because I kind of forgot about that point of it. That's part of wanting knowledge, is wanting a connection to the rest of reality. Right? I don't know about you, but probably my biggest phobia is feeling locked within your own body without being connected to the rest of the world, right? Locked in syndrome. In fact, last night, for the first time in a long time, I had one of these paralysis dreams. Have you ever had those? A paralysis dream is where you become conscious in your own mind that you're laying in bed and you're kind of asleep, but you want to wake up, but you can't move your body, you can't open your eyes in some cases, or in some cases you can kind of see, but you don't have autonomy, you feel disconnected from the rest of reality, and you feel locked within your own mind. And that's a horrible place to be. Imagine that you don't perceive anything at all except your own mind. Isn't that a special kind of hell? Right? To be completely locked in within your own mind, and to have no connection at all with the world around you or with the people that you love, and you feel completely disconnected. That's the very opposite of where we want to be, right? We want connection to reality. This theme of connection will come up again in Buddhism as well. Okay, and in Taoism. It's a big thing that we don't think about, but it's what we truly want. Now, that's an extreme example where you're having a paralysis dream, or you have locked-in syndrome, as it's called, and some people have this, right? Uh, there are other examples of this as well. What about in everyday life? I mean, I'll include knowledge here, right? We're perceptual creatures who connect with reality through a variety of modes. Okay, when do you feel the worst? Probably when you're very anxious or very bored or fearful. Right? And in those moments, you are most disconnected from the present moment around you. When do you feel the best? When you
Did
feel
you
like
just
you're in a.
say that anxiety
Yeah.
is disconnection?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yes, because you are engaged in thought loops within your own mind that are sending bad feelings throughout your whole body, and your mind is focused on that. If you could somehow let go of the thoughts and focus outwards on the world around you, then there would be no anxiety. But anxiety is such that it grabs a hold of you, it grabs your attention. And this is why in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's often an emphasis on mindfulness, right? Practicing mindfulness, being in the moment. That's a big part of it, right? Because when do you feel the best is when you feel like you're in that state of flow, as it's called, right? When you're in the state of flow, people have different things. They have hobbies that allow them to do this. For many people in my generation, it's video games. Right? When you are playing in a video game and it's so much fun and you're just immersed in that, you're immersed in that, you're not thinking about any of your everyday anxieties. You're not worried about death. You're not worried about rent. You're not worried about your relationships. You're purely in the present moment, right? People have different examples of this, right? For some people, it's video games. For some people, it's riding their bike. For some people, it's sex. For some people, it's listening to music. All sorts of examples where you are fully connected to what you are doing right now. Right? It's that connection with the present reality that gives us a deep kind of joy, a deep kind. Now, of course, everything comes with warnings and asterisks to it, but in our everyday life, I think I think this makes sense when you think about when you feel the worst about life and when you feel the best. It's connection versus disconnection. And this is true at the social level as well, right? So many people who struggle with alcohol abuse or drug abuse are feel disconnected from their community in many ways. They feel disconnected from other people, and this is a huge thing. So it's not just disconnection from your immediate physical reality; it's also disconnection from other people. Right? And that's because of the kind of beings that we are. We are conscious beings, and we naturally crave connection to the world around us. So that's what we mean by knowledge here, right? So we don't mean intellectual knowledge. I think it's better to think of this as a kind of perceptual connection, because how are you connecting? Well, you are doing it through your senses, right? You're using your eyes and your ears and your feelings and stuff like that. uh, that's how you connect to the outside world, and we want that. We want that sort of connection. The more connected we feel, the more deeply joyful we feel. Because notice, you can pursue physical pleasures and maybe they feel good, but without that strong connection, you don't really feel good deep down inside. Right? So you want that deeper connection to things. And this is why people describe enlightenment as being one with everything, right? Where the connection with the world around you becomes so strong that your sense of yourself as a separate being disappears. And you realize that you are just one aspect of this huge, large reality. And that's the highest form of connection, is where there's no longer a division between yourself and the whole of reality. And that's when we feel this joy, right? Deep, true joy is an anxiety free state of connection to your surroundings. And we kind of want that. Even psychologists talk about this. They talk about people wanting to avoid these extremes of boredom, of anxiety, of wanting to be somewhere right in the middle. Right? We're constantly seeking that middle place. It's just we're not always that good at it, right? We want sort of an unperturbed, tranquil state of mind where we're just connected with our present reality. Right? And we're not distracted by anxieties and thoughts about yesterday and thoughts about tomorrow. Now, everything comes with a warning label, right? So I would not suggest, uh, as some people do, that you would therefore stop ever thinking about what happened yesterday or what happens tomorrow, right? Uh, as human beings, we need to plan for the future. We need to learn from our mistakes. So there is an extent to which, you need to take this with a grain of salt, right? Don't just stop thinking about anything at all. But here's just this kind of deep truth of when you feel the most joyful, the most deeply, I don't want to say euphoric because that connotes bodily feelings, but just a deep-seated kind of joy. It's when you feel connected with your consciousness to the world around you. Right. So all three of these things go together, right? Because we are conscious beings. What kind of being is it that we crave? Well, we crave our consciousness to exist. Why do we have a consciousness that exists? It's to perceive the world around us. And it's in that we find our deepest kind of joy. Hinduism says that we can have these things without limits. I'm not telling you that you can't, right? But this is the claim that is sometimes made. Of course, all religions will tell you something of a similar nature, right? All of this that we're saying right here, by the way, we can sort of to a certain extent say that all the religions want to provide this for you, right? This is not unique to Hinduism. We could think of ourselves as these beings that crave connection to the world, and that the religions of the world try to provide us with a way of doing that. But here, in the particular way in which Hinduism does this, well, it basically says you need some sort of liberation from your own finitude. Finitude means limitedness, right? You are limited because you have this sense of yourself as this character in your own story, and it's you right there with your particular history, and you are just compartmentalized part of a larger reality, right? So you're compartmentalized yourself. You've made yourself into a smaller being. And to get being, knowledge, and joy without limits, you need to liberate yourself from this smaller sense of being that you've created. It is these egos that we've made up that we can say they're socially constructed. They're constructed by you, but they're also constructed by your culture and your parents, right? Think of how much of your parents' baggage you've brought onto yourself, right? How much the way that you feel about yourself has to do with the way in which media portrays certain things. Think of the standards for men and women that you're supposed to measure up to. Think of all these socially constructed ideas by which we judge ourselves, socially constructed ideas by which we see ourselves as failures. Right? These are sort of made up things, and yet they affect us deeply because we've created these selves that react to that. We've created these limited selves, these limited egos that are finite. But in some sense, this self that you've created is kind of an illusion. Right? And not a total illusion, right? It's there. You made it, but you've only made it, right? It's artificial. It's as though, let's think about a scarecrow in a field. Right? It's real. It's really there, right? It looks like a person. It's stuffed with straw. It's a real object, but of course, it's an illusion if you think that it's a real person. Right? So what we mean by illusion here is not that it doesn't exist. It exists. You made this self up for yourself, and the people in your surroundings helped you create this being, this self. But you're mistaken if you think that this is your true essence, that this is your true self. That's the idea here. That there's a deeper sense of self that you can connect to. There is, behind this idea of this socially constructed ego, there's a true self that in Hinduism is called the Atman. Right? The Atman. So the Atman is this deeper self that exists within everybody. Atman, by the way, is the quiz code. Okay, so there's a quiz on Hinduism this week that's going to reflect what we're talking about in the slideshows. And the quiz code is Atman, right? Atman. Lowercase a. I'm not sure if it cares about lowercase or not, but in the quiz code, it's lowercase a Tman. That's the quiz code, is Atman. So make sure you take the Hinduism quiz this week. It'll be up until Sunday. If I give you the quiz code on a Thursday, the quiz will be up longer. Okay, it'll be up past Sunday. Sometimes I'll give it to you on Tuesday, sometimes on Thursday, just to keep you on your toes and make sure everybody's watching this, right? Okay. So there's this idea here that within everybody, there's a deeper sense of yourself. You're welcome, Adriana. That they call the Atman. And the Atman, unlike your everyday self, which is, we can say, conditioned by our life experience. Right? Let's go back to this again. You're a baby. You're born into the world. You have a certain set of DNA that tells your body how to create itself, and that's going to give you certain capacities, some more than others, right? Everyone is born with different talents and different ways of processing reality, right? We know this, right? A lot of this is genetic, right? So you're born into the world with a particular temperament, but you're also born to a particular set of parents at a particular time in history, in a particular society, in a particular community. And all these particularities of your surroundings are going to shape what kind of ego is formed, what kind of self is formed. Right? This is going to inform you for the rest of your life, right? How you see yourself, what you think you want out of life. That is all created by these contingencies, these things that could have been different, right? If you had been born in a different culture to different parents at a different time, you would have ended up being a different person. Your life experiences would have been different. Social expectations would have been different. Cultural ideas would have been different. All sorts of things would have been different. You would have been different. The path you chose would have been different. So we can see then that sense of self is entirely dependent on the surroundings in which it is raised, in which it grows. Right. So your everyday ego self is conditioned, as we call it. It's conditioned by life experience. Condition means it gives it a certain shape, a certain structure, a certain being, a certain essence. Right? It's conditioned by the outside. But the Atman, this deeper sense of yourself, is not conditioned like that. Right? There's a deeper sense of self that you can tap into that transcends your life experiences and your life expectations and your cultural expectations, all of those things. Right? There's a deeper sense of self that you can tap into. And here's where we really get to the essence of Hinduism, right? Forget for the moment all the pantheon of gods, right? Here's the essence of it. That innermost essence of yourself, that Atman, that is the real you, the unconditioned you, the you that is not shaped by your surroundings, is actually identical with, that's one way to put it, or at least an aspect of God. Right? And God here is understood as Brahman. So this is not necessarily God the way you think of it in Christianity or Judaism. Although for some Hindus, it's very close. Okay? We just always have to be careful with these terms because they can mean different things. But here the idea is this deeper sense of yourself that you can tap into, and you can't just do that necessarily easily. Okay? It takes some practice, as we'll see. It takes the actual religious practice. It takes walking the path of renunciation all the way. It takes liberation from the cycle of reincarnation, right? To really truly realize that this deeper sense of yourself that's there, if only you can uncover it, if only you can get rid of the conditioned ego that's covering it up, then you find this aspect of yourself that's deep within you, and it is part of this larger kind of, let's call it a divine essence of consciousness that is called Brahman. We don't see this Atman in our everyday life because it's obscured, it's covered up by all the psychological distractions that fill up our lives. And that's all the activity of the ego, right? It's all the activity and all its cravings, all its desires, and all its thinking about yesterday and tomorrow, all its anxieties, all its judgments about what's good and what isn't good. I don't mean good and bad in a moral sense, but just what do I want? What am I not getting, right? What's wrong in my life? What do I need to be happy? Right? All these things that the ego comes up with in our everyday life. Uh, it's just constant activity on the part of your egoic self, your constructed, conditioned self. This constant activity is just creating noise that's obscuring this deeper, still essence, this kind of stillness of pure being, knowledge, and joy, that in fact is just, it's just an aspect of God. It's just an aspect of the divine within Hinduism, what is called Brahman. So there's a slogan almost for Hinduism, and that is Atman is Brahman. Atman is Brahman. And within you, there lies Atman. It's just covered up with this socially constructed, conditioned, false self that we've all been conditioned to believe is our real self, right? That's what we think. We want this, this, and this. This is the person that I am. This is the character that I truly am. But that character was created by your surroundings. And this is saying, if you can let go of that, if you can let go of that self, if you can let go of all the chatter that's constantly created by this desiring ego, if you can let go of that, and the waters will part, and you will see something deep within you that is different, from that. That is something that's already fully there. It's complete being, complete knowledge, complete joy. And that is therefore just an aspect, or it is just identical with Brahman, which is the Hindu idea of a supreme God. Okay. Questions so far? We'll talk a little bit more about being, knowledge, and joy, and the sort of
Are these
yeah.
slides part of your Prezi? Because I haven't looked.
Yeah. This is all Prezi, and that's available in Canvas, so you can go back to this and look at this, and they'll be especially helpful for the quiz. The chapters are usually include more than what I include in the slideshows, but the quizzes will be mostly reflective of the slideshows. So you might save yourself a little bit of time. I still want you to read all the chapters, but in terms of studying for the quiz or for the midterm or the final, the slideshows are essential. Okay, are there any questions here about this idea of your everyday self that you're used to being kind of a constructed object, something that you could actually break apart to find something deeper? At least on the surface, does it kind of make sense, I hope? Well, if it doesn't, or if anybody has questions, anytime at all, you can stop me. I know I just talk, but I'm happy to be interrupted. I, in fact, welcome it and would like it.
I always feel a little weird because I'm the only one to interrupt you, but
yeah.
this seems to relate to a lot of times people get very restless and start looking for things outside of what they know, and maybe this is part of that. I've seen a lot of people raise their own religion who just are not content. They want to seek more. I don't know. It's interesting.
Right, for sure. Yeah, right. And I guess this is sort of saying, as long as what you're pursuing, if you see it as something outside of yourself, then you're gonna meet with frustration. Here, the idea is that it's always within yourself already. And the only reason that you think that there's just something outside of yourself is because you've created a separation, right? You've created this self that's separate from the larger reality. Here it's saying, well, Atman, your true self, there is no disconnection from the rest of reality. So there isn't actually anything outside of yourself anyway, right? It's kind of weird, it's trippy to think about, but that's sort of what it's saying, right? Brahman is ultimate reality. It's sort of everything. You are just that. That's all you really are, but you've sort of tricked yourself into thinking that you're a separate being. And so, as a separate being, now you feel disconnected from that larger reality. And so, you seek things from that larger reality to fill that disconnect. But truly, the real way to solve that problem is to get rid of the disconnection altogether. And the only way to do that is to let go of the constructed self and to tap into this deeper sense of self that is at one with everything. Easier said than done, right? Easier said than understood, even, right? But anyway, that's the long and short of it. Right now, it would take you a long time to really get what this is all about, right? And it's going to take certain practices that we will look at, right? It's not just an intellectual understanding. It's never like that, right? It needs to be something that you can actually practice. That's where things like meditation come into play here, right? We've already mentioned mindfulness. You need to create a sort of mental discipline, right? I mean, meditation is a big part of Hinduism as well as Buddhism. And Buddhism is really Hinduism stripped of certain things, right? But the whole idea in meditation is, what are you trying to do? You're trying to sit there and just have a conscious moment by moment experience of the world without all the thoughts that are constantly running through your mind. That you're most of the time you're not even aware of this, right? Most of the time you're not even aware of what's happening, this constant buzzing in your mind. It's happening at a subconscious level and somewhat at the conscious level. When you try to meditate, when you try to just sit there quietly and just feel your breath or just feel your body or just see colors around you. For most people, this is nearly impossible because very quickly you'll notice that you start thinking about everything. And what are you thinking about? You're thinking about the things that your ego cares about. You start thinking about what you're about to do. You start thinking about the fact that you feel uncomfortable sitting there. You start thinking about that embarrassing thing you did yesterday. You start planning tomorrow. You start planning your whole life. Right? Very, very, very difficult to actually sit there and just have a moment to moment conscious experience without the clutter of thoughts. Right? So it takes great mental discipline to get rid of all this clutter of thoughts. But here the idea is, once you do that, if you're able to do that with practice, day in, day out, practice meditation, then you can train your mind to stop thinking all the time. And when you do that, you can have this kind of experience. It's not an intellectual understanding, it's an experience of finding that deeper sense of consciousness that exists, that isn't about your ego and all the things that it thinks about. So to truly know what we're saying here, you kind of have to experience it, right? All the religions will tell you this. It's not enough just to intellectually understand, you actually have to live it. You actually have to immerse yourself in the activity uh, of the religion. And in this case, it's not just meditation, it's also forms of yoga. We'll look at that. But meditation is a good one to think about because it speaks directly to this idea of the psychological distractions that keep us involved in our ego, right? And meditation teaches you to get rid of those mental distractions, to create a clear, calm mind. And once you stop thinking all these discursive thoughts, all these thoughts about yesterday and tomorrow and who am I and what am I doing and what doesn't feel good, what does feel good, if you can get rid of those and stop thinking altogether, then you feel something. You feel something deeper, and you feel a deep connection with the reality around you. And again, that image of becoming one with everything that you hear often in connection with enlightenment and meditation makes perfect sense here, right? Becoming one with everything means realizing your true essence is Atman, and Atman is Brahman. And Brahman is everything. It's reality itself, right? In a certain way. But things hamper these things that we want: joy, knowledge, and being. And like we talked about, in the very general sense, it is just the ego self that wants things, right? But we can talk about some of the particular things, right? What keeps us from feeling joy? Sometimes it's physical pain. But notice that if you have the right kind of attitude, right, because pain is unavoidable in life, right? That's one of the one of the Four Noble Truths in Buddhism, right? It's sort of the first rule of Buddhism, right? You have the first rule of Fight Club. First root of Buddhism is life is suffering, right? There's just no way to avoid it. So how can we have joy if there's suffering? Well, one thing to point out is that if you have pain that has a purpose, and if you can train yourself to not have fear, because again, fear is one of these things that the ego creates. It's one of these distractions. And through mental discipline, like meditation and perhaps yoga and things like that, you can actually uncondition your ego from feeling fear. Right? So then pain doesn't have to be a hindrance to joy. Uh, I'll always say this, there's a warning label on everything. There's an asterisk to everything. Some forms are physical pain. I don't know that you can simply transform into joy. I don't know if that's possible. Maybe it is if you're extremely into the practice, right? Maybe it is possible. You hear about ascetics, right? People who really do the path of renunciation in many forms of the religions are able to endure great forms of pain. So perhaps it is possible, but it's at the extreme, right? That might not be possible for everyone. I'm thinking, for example, of the Buddhist monk who set himself on fire as a form of protest, right? And he sat there meditating as the flames were coming off of him. He was burning to death, and he sat there still in meditation. So it's not, I guess, an empty promise. It's possible for some people. A less extreme example is something like things that we do all the time that involve something that isn't pleasant, right? Uh, I've run sometimes. I did my first and probably only ever marathon last year, right? Kind of painful, kind of hard, but it has a purpose to it. And so it kind of feels good. It makes you feel good. Why do people run marathons if it makes you feel miserable? Well, the misery is part of it, but somehow we still choose it because there's something about uh, overcoming the pain. There's something about going through the pain if you have the right kind of purpose. So pain does not need to be a hindrance to joy, to this deep-seated kind of joy. We can accept that pain is part of the world and we can still have this kind of joy. But again, it involves the training of the mind, right? It involves the training of the ego. It involves mental discipline. We often feel a lack of joy, a lack of deep happiness because we're not getting what we want. Right? We're just not getting what we want. We didn't get the job we wanted. We're not as rich as we want. We don't have the car that we want. We don't have whatever it is. Right? This often happens because we are so involved in the ego, right? We're so caught up in what is good for us or what we think is good for us or what we think will make us happy or make us feel pleasure. Right? So goes back to that idea of throwing yourself into service of the larger community, not just identifying with your small self, but with a greater good. Right? So when you do that, there's less frustration over not getting what you want because what you want is to serve your community, and you can always do that. Right? So that's part when you get frustrated over not getting what you want. That is again that ego that needs to be overcome. That limit itself. It's like a little desiring machine, right? We use the term ego as an old term, but Freud made it famous, right? The psychologist Freud. And Freud just says that's just that part of your brain, that part of your mind that craves things. And there's other parts of your mind, according to Freud, right? But we can kind of recognize that. There's this part of you that just says, I want this, I want this. And if you don't get it, you start feeling frustrated. Well, if you can have the mental discipline to overcome that selfish kind of craving and instead try to serve other people around you, uh, again, the asterisk here is you still need to run your own life as well, right? You need to practice self-care. You do sometimes need to watch Netflix and relax, right? So you can't serve other people if you don't have good mental health. So sometimes you need to take care of yourself, right? But it's a fine line you have to walk here. Sometimes people get so caught up in what they think they need out of life that all they really need to do is stop looking at things in such a myopic, selfish way and open yourself up to the larger community and identify with their needs, not just your own needs, and try to satisfy other people's needs, try to help other people. That is going to help you not get frustrated with your own life. Boredom, existential ennui, it's the same sort of thing, right? We identify with the ego, and the ego just has a small area of concerns. And so we think this is not exciting enough, right? We form these automatic judgments in our minds. Think about that. Think about anything that you do where you're bored. It's because some part of your mind is telling you this is not good enough. This is not good enough. Well, that's your ego talking. I think a good example that will come up again and again, especially in Buddhism, is doing the dishes. Does anybody love doing the dishes? For most people, that's just a chore, right? Some people like it. For most people, that's just a chore. You have to do it. Even if you have a dishwasher, you got to load the dishwasher. You sometimes got to scrape the stuff off. Right? It's boring. It's annoying. I'd rather be doing something else. Why do we feel that way? Is it something in the activity itself? Well, no, not at all, right? We know that some people actually enjoy the activity, and we know that if you are, if you are someone who's really into mindfulness, it's not at all a bad activity. There's nothing about the activity itself that's inherently bad. It's our own attitude about it. It's our own expectations that are ingrained within the ego, right? As though when you're doing the dishes and you're annoyed and bored by it, there's this constant judgment that is happening, maybe at the subconscious level of this is not good. This is not what we want, right? The ego saying, I'd rather be doing something else. This is dumb. This is stupid. And then it makes you feel bad, right? That makes you feel disconnected from your activity. Right? The person who enjoys doing the dishes is connected to the activity, right? They might enjoy the warmth of the water on their hands. They might smell the smell of the soap. They might get pleasure from knowing that they're doing something that's good, right? They're cleaning their household, and maybe they're serving other people in the household. If you can train your mind to not be so concerned with what the ego wants, then you can overcome this kind of boredom with everyday activities. Everyday activities can become just as joyful as that favorite activity that you have, playing video games or riding a bike or whatever it is. Things that you normally think of as boring can actually become transformed into something that's entirely wonderful because you are fully connected to it, because you are not listening, or you're no longer have to worry about this ego that has particular demands about life. You can instead feel fully immersed in the activity without judging it. You're going to see that much of Buddhism is Hinduism, and Buddhism arose in a culture of Hinduism. Okay, Buddha, supposed founder of Buddhism, in many ways was trying to get back to basics. Right? You might compare this to the Protestant Reformation reacting to the Catholic Church. Right? From the outside of Catholicism and Protestantism, they're both Christianity. Right? Now, ask a Catholic and ask a Protestant, they might feel differently. They might say, no, that's a heretical version of my religion. To the outside, we can see that Protestantism is a natural reaction to what happened with Catholicism in Europe. Buddhism is in many ways the same thing. It's reacting to certain elements of Hinduism, but it's really getting back to the core of things. So Buddhism, all this stuff that we're saying here is in Buddhism as well. Okay, just so you know that ahead of time. Okay. Uh, Hindrances to knowledge, this connection that we want. Well, like I said, these things are all connected, right? Speaking of connection, I pretty much said all this. What's a hindrance to knowledge? Well, it's a type of ignorance. It's not intellectual ignorance, but it's rather you remove ignorance by clearing away psychological clutter, right? When you remove all that messy stuff, then you see things clearly. Then you know reality for what it is. And then you know your truer self, your Atman. You know this deeper self that is connected to everything and that is in this sort of sense divine. Maybe not in the way that we understand it in Christianity and so forth, but still that's a way of tapping into the divine, is clearing away the clutter. So in many cases, we think of knowledge of, you read a book, you put ideas in your head. That's what we think of as knowledge. Here, that's not what knowledge is. Here, we want to get rid of false ideas, right? We're getting rid of stuff so that we can clear away our vision so that we can see reality for what it truly is, and we can become connected to it. We become connected to this deeper sense of ourselves that make us feel like there's no longer any separation between us, the world, and the divine. Right? It's all one. Obstacles to being, to our desire for being, to our desire for continued conscious existence is death, right? We could say, well, death is the ultimate obstacle to this, what we want, right? We want being, but death gets in the way. We're all going to stop being. Here we could point out that, in fact, this egoic self that you're clinging on to, and that's what you're really worried about going away, is this constructed, limited sense of yourself. That is actually always dying, right? Your egoic self is not this stable thing. That's always changing from day to day. Right? So you wake up tomorrow, you're kind of a different person already. So in this sense, reincarnation actually happens within a lifetime, right? Uh, but here, the point of view of Hinduism is that there's an enduring self, a deeper sense of self that transcends all these psychological states that your ego goes through. Because again, your ego is defined by what it wants, right? And by what it thinks. And those are particulars. And those particulars change from moment to moment, from day to day. So if this ego is this, with this particular set of desires and wants and expectations, and then the next moment is changed, that older ego actually already died. So you're in fact dying all the time. Yourself is dying all the time. You're constantly being reborn in that sense. So there's sort of a micro reincarnation of the egoic self going on all the time. So once you realize that, you can let go of the fear of that part of you dying, right? That egoic self is always dying. There's not some end point where it dies. It's already did it yesterday. It already did it the day before that. So there's no worry there. But in fact, there's a deeper sense of self, the Atman, of course, that's deeper than that. And it's because it's not limited to the desires and the expectations of the ego. It's a deeper sense of consciousness. And that enduring self survives the death of the body, right? Reincarnation. Now, here's a big question about reincarnation. Because notice, for a lot of people, they think of reincarnation as the egoic self coming back, right? I'm reborn. Used to be Napoleon, right? And now here I am. I have past memories of myself. I used to be Cleopatra. People talk about reincarnation in this way. That I used to be a farmer during World War II. Right? Now, when you think of reincarnation in that way, you're actually thinking of the egoic self being reincarnated, because you're thinking of this socially constructed self with a set of desires and expectations and memories, personality traits. Those are all part of the egoic self. So there's kind of a tension here between how to interpret. I'm going to be done right after this. I realize I'm going late. I'll be done after this. We'll finish it next time. I'll leave you with this. There's a puzzle about how to interpret what reincarnation means. On the one hand, you can think, yeah, there's some sense in which you, truly you, Alicia, right? I'm looking at you because you're on the camera, that it's you that will be reborn in another lifetime. Right? And then maybe you'll have some memories of you now. Well, if it's like that, then it's the egoic self that keeps surviving. Because it's identified with a particular person in time. Whereas the deeper sense of self, the Atman, that's identical to Brahman, is kind of not like that. It's a deeper self that is not defined by personal characteristics. So if that's what reincarnation means, it just means that consciousness will appear again in new life forms, right? Because Atman ultimately is just a kind of consciousness, a kind of being that's defined by consciousness. And that's what Brahman is as well, right? So that just means that, well, Brahman is this sort of way of talking about our collective consciousness, And it's, you will die, but another baby will be born, and that baby will receive consciousness, and it comes from the same source as your consciousness. If that's what reincarnation means. It's not quite the same thing as what people often think it means. And even within Hinduism, there's disagreement there. Not everybody agrees on how to interpret reincarnation. I think it's more consistent with the idea Atman is Brahman, the egoic self is socially constructed. To me, it makes more sense that the egoic self completely disappears if you die. But if Atman is just a way of talking about consciousness, collective consciousness, let's call it, then reincarnation is not anything all that mysterious or supernatural or magical, really. It's not a soul being recycled, as we sometimes think of it. It would just be consciousness disappears in one body, but it reappears in another body. And there's really no difference between my consciousness and your consciousness anyway. So that when this baby is born, yes, it's all the same consciousness, right? Appearing in different life forms. I'm going to leave you with that. This puzzle of what is reincarnation. Is it the reincarnation of a particular soul or something like that? Where a particular soul is defined by its memories and its desires and its personality? Well, that looks to be a whole lot like this ego that we're supposed to transcend, right? Or is it simply consciousness, Atman, Brahman, is reappearing in different life forms at different time all the time, right? And in that sense, this reincarnation. And if you identify with that Atman, if you identify with that deeper sense of consciousness and being, then you don't have anything to fear, right? If you think, I truly am not this self that I've constructed, I'm afraid is going to die. I am this deeper sense of consciousness that exists in all conscious beings. Then you have nothing to worry about, right? Once you let go of all the fears and desires of the ego, right? Then you have no longer death to worry about. You'll have being because consciousness exists in some form or another. Okay, we'll stop there. Thank you, everybody, for staying a little bit late. Thank you for coming to the meeting. I'm glad there were more people today. I really appreciate that. It makes me feel like I'm doing this for something, Okay, we'll hopefully finish this next time. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Mark.